Every summer has a story. This is Arlyn Hackett for Storytellers of San Diego, and I welcome you to the first Thursday virtual concert at Eclipse Chocolate Bistro. Summer is a time for fun, for vacations, it's warm weather. Kids are out of school and they're off to the beach for swimming and surfing. There's hiking and picnics and going to outdoor concerts and campouts. Summer is a season for barbecues, ice cream, iced tea, iced lemonade. Summer is time for cross-country vacations and trips to maybe even further places away where we might find and explore and discover and learn. Summer is a time for reunions and weddings. In all of these experiences, there is often a story. Every summer has a story. Now 5 storytellers will give you their take on a summer story. My story is about the first time I ever went to camp. I was 11 years old. The campground was on the Solomon River in north central Kansas, which was about 40 miles from where my family lived on a farm. Frankly, the campground was pretty rustic and kind of tacky. Things were kind of worn down. There weren't any cabins. There was simply barracks. They said that this used to be a military, this was for the military during World War II. Anyway, the barracks were just as you imagined them. There were 2 barracks for boys, 2 barracks for girls, and there were rows of bunk beds that went from one end to the other of the barrack. But what made the Camp Lincoln really nice was it was located on the river in a woods. Now, if you know anything about Kansas and where I lived on the farm, you could go miles without seeing a tree. So it was really exciting to me to be able to go roaming around in the woods and go on hiking trails. The camp had all the usual activities you expect of a camp, but there are 2 things that I remember most. It was the first time I ever ate s'mores. Now, I don't know if I particularly liked the taste of the s'more or I was infatuated with how do you eat this gooey mess of roasted marshmallow, melted chocolate, and graham crackers without getting it all over your face. But the other thing I remember about Camp Lincoln was Beverly. Beverly was a Methodist missionary from the Cherokee Nation. She was there as kind of a guest counselor, guest lecturer. She had a beautiful singing voice, and she was a beautiful person. She told stories about her family, and one night at a campfire, she told us the story of her grandmother, who as a young girl walked from Georgia all the way to Oklahoma in a march that we now know as the Trail of Tears. Around the campfire, it was a moment of emotion because it seemed like everybody hearing this saga had started crying a little bit, myself included. It was one of those moments, and it was just finding out a history that we didn't know about. I hate to say it, but I cannot remember ever in elementary school or high school ever reading or hearing about the Trail of Tears. You know, I don't have really much of anything else to say about that experience at Camp Lincoln because it's those 2 things that I really most remember. Many years later, after I had graduated from college and had discovered books detailing the history of the Cherokee and the 4 other tribes that were removed from southeastern United States to Oklahoma, I learned a lot more about the Trail of Tears. As I read this history, I often cried a little bit. I remembered Beverly, and I remembered her grandma. You see, it was kind of painful to me to realize that these 15,000 Native Americans that died about on the march had left so much behind. When the people talk about the natives, they don't talk about the fact that this group of tribes were farmers. They had cleared the land, they planted crops, they knew about crop rotation, they knew about plant fertilizer, which was unknown in Europe. They taught the colonists all of this, and the colonists wanted to take the lands not for food, but for cotton. So 17,000 soldiers were brought in and removed those native tribes and marched them all the way from Georgia. They marched on foot to Oklahoma. When I read about this, it made me sad. It made me really sad because a lot of it was I thought about my own family. What if someone would have come and confiscated our farm? I knew it would hurt. But in the process of all of that, I developed a kind of, as I'm reading, I kind of had developed a kinship with the Native Americans. But then I also realized that my family, my ancestry, was from the plains. And our families tore up the prairies to plant crops, and there were no more buffalo hunting grounds, and the tribes were forced away. I felt guilty. I felt sad. When I was 14, my family moved away from the Solomon River Valley, and what happened shortly thereafter, like 2 or 3 years later, the Bureau of Reclamation decided that they wanted to take this area and build a major reservoir and dam. After we'd moved away, that's when all the construction began. Camp Lincoln was torn down, and eventually, by 1969, that entire area was flooded. There was no more campground. What happened, though, was before this all took place, there were native tribes that protested the construction of that reservoir because it was on sacred land. I did not realize at the time that Camp Lincoln was on sacred native land. I sometimes have wondered, did Beverly know that when she was there? It's kind of a puzzle. So time passes. Your time passes to just a few weeks ago. I was reading an article about German prisoners of war camps in the United States and came across this interesting little statistic, or interesting story, that in Kansas there were 16 prisoner of war camps, German prisoner of war camps, during World War II, and that Camp Lincoln was one of those. Now, we were told that it was the barracks were for the military. We didn't know that the military was not American soldiers. It was German prisoners. What's kind of strange about this, and maybe great, is that it appears that most of the German prisoners were glad to be there. They were taken from North Africa. They were captured there. And it was relief for them not to have to continue fighting the war. Now, why they were brought to Kansas, however, is that there were so many servicemen that were involved in the fighting in World War II that they needed people to help work the farms in order to increase the food supply for the country. And those German soldiers seemed to have appreciated being able to be there and do something that they wanted to do. Now, I don't remember anybody ever talking about this when I lived in Kansas. So I decided that I would call 5 classmates from my high school and ask them if they ever knew anything about German prisoner of war camps in Kansas. No one knew anything. What's particularly remarkable is that one of those 16 prisoner of war camps actually was located 1 mile from where I went to high school. It's kind of amazing. It's kind of exciting in some ways to think about all of this. And for me, it's particularly important because now when I think about Camp Lincoln, it's now clouded a bit by some sad memories, knowing some sad things, knowing some darker things. But for me, Camp Lincoln is more than just a place. It's a story in time.